Hey everybody, it's Jim from Cigars. And before I was a YouTube cigar reviewer, I spent about 15 years in business where I had to travel each and every week. And I bet you I took 50 or 60 round trip flights every year for about 15 years. So I learned a lot about traveling. I learned a lot about traveling with cigars. So what I want to do today is go through some of the stuff that I've learned through trial and error, a lot of it, but also review some of the TSA rules, which have changed recently. But before we do that, I want to show you one travel tip, and that's if you're flying, never be in the middle seat.
Could I grab one of your cigars? Oh. I think it's just allergy. Oh, man.
The most common question that I get asked usually has to do with traveling on planes with cutters and lighters. So let's look at that first. Let's talk about cutters. The actual TSA recommendation is this. While cigar cutters are generally permitted, we recommend that you pack them in your checked baggage. TSA officers have the discretion to prohibit any item through the screening checkpoint if they believe it poses a security threat. So, gives you some leeway on cutters. When I traveled, I generally took them in my carry-on in like a backpack that I carried with me. Only once in my bag was getting checked because it just got randomly chosen for screening. The officer pulled out a Cigar cutter and was all set to confiscate it, and I sort of had to talk my way out of it, which fortunately I did. They do have a lot of discretion. The best way to handle it is put it in your checked baggage, and that avoids any question at all. Another suggestion is if you do want to carry a cutter on a plane with you, take a V cutter or a punch cutter, because chances are those will be deemed less of a security threat than a guillotine type cutter. Okay, let's take a look at lighters, which is a little bit more of a tricky situation. When I traveled, I used to be able to take a torch lighter in my check bag, but I couldn't do it in my carry-on. Honestly, once in a while I forgot and it snuck into my carry-on. I had it in there for something else in my backpack, and TSA would spot it maybe a little over half the time. I lost a few lighters that way. Fortunately, they were pretty cheap. But the current rule is they are not allowed in checked baggage and they are not allowed as a carry-on. So there are exceptions to that I'll get to. So let's kind of review. I'm showing you a chart here for all the types of lighters. A BIC-type lighter, a disposable lighter, is allowed in the aircraft cabin, but not allowed in checked baggage. Zippo-type lighters, if they have no liquid fuel, all the liquid has to be absorbed, are allowed in the aircraft cabin, but again, not in checked baggage. A Zippo-type lighter that has liquid fuel in it is not permitted under any circumstances, nor is a torch lighter, which we just talked about. There is an exception though, and that's a DOT special permit container. And you can get these at a hardware store. I've seen them even listed on Walmart's website. You can get them certainly through companies like Cigar as well. The only caution on this is make sure that it's DOT permitted. Don't buy one that isn't. Basically, these are a little fireproof box, and they hold generally one lighter. And you only are permitted one lighter regardless, so that works out. No lighter shaped like a weapon, for obvious reasons. No cans of refill gas or anything like that are permitted. And some of the larger butane lighters like chef torches and stuff obviously are not allowed either. Basically, your best options are, if you want to just get a BIC lighter or buy one when you get to your destination, those are perfectly fine to take in your carry-on. Or get a DOT special permitted container if you want to take your torch lighter with you. So, pretty straightforward. All right, let's talk about protecting your cigars, because that was a big problem that I had when I was traveling, is keeping your cigars that get jostled around, because you're either going to have them in your carry-on or in your checked baggage. So first and foremost, what you want to do is choose a container that is going to have padding that's going to keep your cigars from getting bumped against each other. A very common option for that is straightforward padded case. A brand name for those is Herfador, and they hold anywhere from 3 on up to 10 or 15 cigars depending on the size that you want to get. Another way to do that, if you want to be a little more upper class, is there's some fancy ones that you can get that hold 3 or 4 cigars, and they also usually hold your cutter as well in a nice little case. If you're going to humidify and you're going to be gone for 4 or 5 days or more, humidifying your cigars is probably a necessity. Shorter trips, not so important, and as long as you have them in a good container, they'll probably be fine for 3 days or so. My recommendation to you is, if you do decide to use the built-in humidors in these, for example, in the Herfadors, is use either distilled water or that stuff they often call cigar juice. As an alternative to that, I've got some hard plastic shell cases that I use sometimes for overflow on my humidor that hold like 10 or 15 or 20 cigars, and they're very hard, they're very sturdy, they're small enough that they fit easily into a suitcase. So a lot of times I'll throw in a Bovita pack and take those. And I mentioned before about humidifying a Herfador. Use the small Bovita pack. That's the simplest way to do it. If you decide to do what I do with my makeshift hard case, you got to have some sort of padding in there. What I do is I usually will take off a bunch of plastic wrap and kind of bunch it up. What you don't want ever is for your cigars to be loose and banging around. And also a good tip is take cigars that have cellophane on them, because if they aren't in cellophane, take it from somebody who's been there. It's hard to keep the wrapper from getting all beat up beyond repair. All right, another thing, plan for your destination. And this is something we often overlook. So one thing I always look at is, what is the humidity level going to be? If you've watched some of my videos from earlier this year, I spent about a month in Southern California right on the beach. And I really didn't need any sort of humidification for my cigars. I just kept them tightly in my makeshift Herfador, called it good, and I'm sure that was more than adequate for them, given that it was so humid all the time on the beach. Conversely, if you're going into a standard hotel room or into, let's say, a ski resort, it can be very, very dry. Man, winter hotel rooms, one thing I learned from traveling during the winter is hotel rooms like in the upper Midwest and Northeast, man, they get dry. They are dry, dry, dry. You always want to be cognizant of what the humidity is going to be, where you're going and where you're staying, so that you can bring the proper amount of humidification with you. Another thing you should be careful to research is where it's okay to smoke at your destination. Check with your hotel if you're staying at a hotel or an Airbnb or something like that, and make sure you look at the local regulations in terms of public smoking. You don't want to be walking down the sidewalk and end up with a ticket for smoking in public. In some places that is the case. Check out local cigar lounges where you're going. They're a good place to go, and you can meet some interesting people in that area and learn a little bit. Another thing to look for is the smoking area at the hotel you're staying at, if you're staying at a hotel. Maybe they have a nice smoking area, or look at nearby hotels. I had a situation where I was staying in Anaheim, California, and my hotel had a really crappy smoking area. It was literally the loading dock. I did notice that about half a block away was another hotel and a really nice outdoor smoking area with padded chairs and ashtrays and a lot of friendly people. Another thing to check out at your hotel is the balcony situation. You got to be careful, because these hotel rooms today, they have gigantic fines, $200 or $300 a lot of times. In some hotels that doesn't apply to the balcony, so that's something to ask about. In some it does. And if you smoke out on the balcony and it's going to drift around and somebody's going to smell it and rat you out, so you got to be careful about that. All right. Hopefully you got something out of these tips for traveling with cigars. I will see you next time from Cigars, Cigars, Cigars.